In 1814, a young woman from a perfectly respectable English family was effectively erased from polite society, stripped of her inheritance, and rendered legally invisible for the rest of her natural life. Not because of a scandal, not because of a crime, because she waltzed with a man at Almack's assembly rooms before receiving permission from one of the venue's fearsome patronesses. One dance, that's all it took, and the chain of events between that 3-minute waltz and her total social destruction reveals something that Bridgerton, for all its drama, actually understates. The real Regency marriage market wasn't just cutthroat, it was a machine designed to grind women into compliance, and one wrong step at any point in the process could set off a cascade that no amount of wealth, beauty, or charm could reverse. So let's rewind. Let's start with the smallest, most trivial-seeming moment in a debutante's life, and trace exactly how everything unraveled. Before a young woman ever set foot in a ballroom, before she ever locked eyes with a duke across a candlelit room, the London season had already begun sorting her. And the sorting started with a piece of paper. Specifically, the voucher to Almack's assembly rooms on King Street. Bridgerton gives us Lady Whistledown and Queen Charlotte as the gatekeepers of social acceptance, but the real gatekeepers were 6 or 7 women known as the Lady Patronesses of Almack's. These women, including the infamous Lady Jersey and the terrifying Countess Lyven, held absolute veto power over who received a voucher to their weekly Wednesday ball. No voucher, no entry. No entry, no access to the most eligible bachelors in England. And no access to those bachelors meant, for many families, financial catastrophe. See, Bridgerton frames the season as exciting, stressful, sure, but ultimately romantic. In reality, the season was a 4-month economic negotiation disguised as a party. Families spent what we'd calculate as hundreds of thousands of modern dollars preparing a daughter for presentation. Gowns, lodging in London, carriages, calling cards, chaperones. For many landed families, especially those whose estates were entailed away from daughters, marriage was not a hope. It was the only financial plan that existed for their girls, so when a patroness of Almack's looked at your family name and decided you were not quite the thing, she wasn't just declining a party invitation. She was slamming a door on your economic future. Now let's say you got in. You received your voucher. You arrived at Almack's before 11 p.m. because the doors literally locked at 11, and the Duke of Wellington himself was once turned away for arriving at 7 minutes past. You're inside, you're wearing an approved dress because Almack's had a dress code and the patronesses enforced it ruthlessly. No trousers for men. Modest necklines for women. You're behaving perfectly. And then you're asked to dance. In Bridgerton, a dance is charged with romantic tension. In reality, a dance was a contractual signal. If a gentleman asked you to dance and you refused him, you were not permitted to dance with anyone else for the rest of the evening. This was an actual enforced rule. It existed to prevent women from publicly ranking men by desirability. But the effect was to remove a woman's ability to say no without punishment. And the waltz, that icon of Regency romance, was genuinely controversial when it arrived in English ballrooms around 1812 and 1813. It required close physical contact, a man's hand on a woman's waist. The patronesses of Almack's controlled who was permitted to waltz, and dancing it without their explicit approval was considered a shocking breach of propriety. Not a charming rebellion, a reputation-ending mistake. This is where our domino chain accelerates, because reputation in Regency England wasn't a vague social concept. It was a currency, and it operated on a brutal double standard that Bridgerton only hints at. Here is what the show gets right. Gossip mattered. Here is what the show underplays. Gossip was functionally a legal system. A woman's reputation was her only asset in the marriage market. She had no independent legal standing. She could not own property if her father's estate was entailed. She could not enter a profession. She could not even control her own money if she had any. Her value was calculated almost entirely on 2 factors: her family's social standing and her perceived virtue. And virtue in this context meant not just sexual purity, but total behavioral compliance. Being seen alone with a man for even a few minutes could compromise a woman. Not might, could, and once compromised, the damage spread outward like a shockwave. Her younger sisters would become harder to match because the family name now carried a stain. Her mother would be whispered about for failing to chaperone properly. Her father's social connections could weaken, affecting business and political alliances that had nothing to do with marriage at all. One girl seen in a garden with a cavalry officer at the wrong moment could destabilize an entire family's standing for a generation. And this is where reality becomes darker than anything Bridgerton has shown us. Because even if everything went right, even if a woman navigated the season flawlessly and secured a proposal from a suitable man, what awaited her on the other side of the altar was not a partnership. It was a legal disappearance. Under the doctrine of coverture, which was the foundational legal framework for marriage in Regency England, a woman ceased to exist as an independent legal person the moment she married. This is not an exaggeration. The great legal theorist William Blackstone wrote, and this is a direct quote, "The very being or legal existence of the woman is suspended during the marriage. Suspended, like she was put on pause. Her property became her husband's property. Any money she earned became his money. She could not sign contracts. She could not sue or be sued. She could not keep her own wages if she somehow managed to work. Her children were legally his children, and if the marriage fell apart, she had no presumptive right to custody. Even her physical body was, in many legal interpretations, under his authority. Bridgerton shows us women choosing husbands based on attraction, compatibility, and love. And love matches did exist in the Regency. But the women making those choices were doing so knowing that they were about to hand over every legal right they possessed to the man standing across from them at the altar. A good husband meant a comfortable life. A bad husband meant a prison with no exit, because divorce was functionally impossible for women. Between 1700 and 1857, there were exactly 4 divorces granted to women by Act of Parliament. 4 in over 150 years. A man could divorce his wife for adultery. A woman could not divorce her husband for adultery. She needed to prove adultery combined with an aggravating factor like bigamy, incest, or life-threatening cruelty. The system was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. So let's trace the complete domino chain from that waltz at Almack's. A young woman dances the waltz without receiving permission from a patroness. She is noticed. She is discussed. The patronesses, offended by the breach of their authority, decline to renew her voucher for the following week. Without access to Almack's, her visibility in the marriage market drops sharply. The eligible men who might have courted her are now courting the women who are at Almack's. Her family extends their stay in London, spending money they may not have, trying to engineer introductions through other channels, private balls, opera boxes, promenades in Hyde Park. But the Whisper network is efficient. She was denied a voucher. People want to know why. The story of the unauthorized waltz becomes a story about her character. She is headstrong. She is improper. She is perhaps not quite virtuous. By the end of the season, she has no proposal. Her family returns to the country financially strained. The next year, she is a year older in a market that openly favored youth. Her younger sister is now approaching her own debut, and the family must choose where to invest their dwindling resources. Within a few seasons, she is quietly reclassified, not as a prospect, but as a spinster. And a spinster in Regency England was a dependent for life, living on the charity of relatives, managing a brother's household perhaps, financially and socially invisible. All because she put her hand in a man's and stepped onto a dance floor 60 seconds too early. This is what Bridgerton aestheticizes. The gowns, the glances, the empire waistlines, they're gorgeous, and the show does a genuinely interesting job of exploring social pressure. But the real season was not a romantic comedy with stakes. It was an economic gauntlet inside a legal system that treated women as transferable property, and the margin for error was essentially zero. The Regency marriage market is one of those historical systems that gets more unsettling the closer you look. And I guarantee there are details I haven't covered here that are even stranger than an unauthorized waltz destroying someone's future. So here's what I want to know. What is the most bizarre, most jaw-dropping fact you've encountered about Regency courtship, marriage, or social rules? Drop it in the comments, because I am genuinely collecting these for a potential follow-up. And if this kind of deep dive into the real history behind the fiction is your thing, Subscribing means you won't miss it when that sequel arrives. Until then, be grateful you live in an era where dancing with the wrong person at the wrong time is just an awkward story, not a life sentence.